Oh, great. I'd like to begin tonight's talk with our Indigenous peoples acknowledgement. So as Crystal Bridges in the Momentary, we recognize our role as settlers and guests in the Northwest Arkansas region. We acknowledge the Caddo, Quapaw, and Osage, as well as the many Indigenous caretakers of this land and water. We appreciate the enduring influence of the vibrant, diverse, and contemporary cultures of Indigenous peoples. We are conscious of the role in colonizations that museums have played. As cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to engage in the dismantling of historical and systemic invisibility of Indigenous peoples past, present, and future. We choose to intentionally hold ourselves accountable to appropriate conversation, representation, connection, and education to facilitate a space of measurable change. Oh. Thanks, y'all. My name is Shusha Rodriguez. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Associate Curator for Contemporary Art here at Crystal Bridges, and it is my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our opening talk celebrating the grand opening of our spring exhibition, Exquisite Creatures. This is the first of many programs supporting the exhibition, and I would like to personally invite all of you to come back tomorrow for Creature Fest, a day of activities, art making, and animals, both real and mythical, continuing to celebrate the show. The program will also include a special talk with Christian Cooper, the author of Better Life Through Birding, at 11 a.m. I'll definitely be there, and I hope you all will too. Yes? Fantastic. Exquisite Creatures is a dialogue with art, nature, and science that asks the questions, what is it about the natural world that calls to us? Throughout the exhibition, artist and naturalist Christopher Marley reflects on humanity's intimate relationship with nature, revealing its intricate beauty and diversity. Through three-dimensional works comprised of animal, mineral, and plant specimens arranged in precise geometric compositions. Shown together, these works create an immersive environment which inspire wonder and fosters a desire to preserve the natural world. Tonight, you'll hear directly from Christopher Marley himself in conversation with our very own Kyle Kellums of KUAF radio station based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Christopher Marley, who uses he, him pronouns, is an American artist, author, and naturalist born in Los Angeles and raised in the Pacific Northwest. At 18, he left home and lived for over a decade in dozens of countries, pursuing a career in fashion while studying art and design. His artwork has been exhibited in hundreds of galleries and special exhibits worldwide, including the Houston Museum of Natural Science, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, the Beatty Museum of Biodiversity in Vancouver, British Columbia, and now here at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. Marley's first book, Pheromone, was named one of the best books of 2008 by the Times UK, and his second book, 2015's Biophilia, is a New York Times bestseller. Marley's new book, Exquisite Creatures, is the most comprehensive of his works and was recently released in 2023. And if you feel like you don't have a copy and you absolutely need one, well, when you look at that, we have copies for sale at the back just for you. We keep you in mind always. Kyle Kellums, who uses he, him pronouns, began working in radio in 1979 at KTLO in Mountain Home, Arkansas. He attended the University of Arkansas and worked as a student at KUAF, our local NPR affiliate. After a few years back at KTLO and as news director at KIX 104, he returned to KUAF as news director in 1989. He began producing the program that you may have heard, Ozarks at Large, in March of 1990. It's now heard 6 days a week here in Arkansas. In October, the program began airing in Little Rock. Kyle lives in Fayetteville with his wife, Laura, who is the director of the Northwest Arkansas office, Arkansas Advocates for Children and Family, and Daisy, an Australian cattle dog who has defended the house from UPS invasion for 3 years. Our presentation of Exquisite Creatures would not have been possible without our amazing sponsors, so let's give them a warm round of applause and thanks to Coca-Cola, Surfco, Gelmar, and Mary Beth and Mickey Mayfield for their generous support for this show. And let's give y'all too a round of applause for choosing to spend this glorious spring evening with us here. And now, let's give a great big round of applause to welcome Christopher Marley and Kyle Kellums to this, right here.
I want to make sure, I hope everybody here has had a chance to see Exquisite Creatures. Raise your hands if you, okay, great.
Good.
Great, because I know you'll have questions, because you can't walk through there and not have questions. So we're going to have an opportunity before the evening ends to have questions from the audience. I have three that I think are probably universal when people see your work that they want to know. So I'm going to ask, and I'm sure you've answered these before, but we want to know.
Okay.
First one, how does one begin to do this? I know that you travel to many different countries.
Yeah, it starts, I think, in my experience at least, it starts a lot earlier than that. I think everyone could relate to the idea that, you know, I was drawn to certain things as a little kid. I had these, you know, these primal memories, and that was the case for me. From the very beginning, I was drawing, and it was always monsters or fantastical creatures, just trying to dream up the most extraordinary, the strangest, the scariest, you know, creatures that I could come up with. And a close second was that I was a reptile fanatic. I don't know why I came to this earth with some kind of a pre-programmed adoration for snakes and lizards, but that was my thing. And so, you know, growing up in rural Oregon and being horrifically ADHD, my parents would kick me out all the time, and my friends were the reptiles and snakes and lizards that I could find outdoors. And so kind of those two things were really, it was kind of an easy, as this all started to happen, and as I began to travel, and as I began to be exposed to organisms that I had no idea existed. I started traveling kind of late 80s, and I had the opportunity to live and work in about 40 different countries, and this is all pre-internet days, and so I had never seen and never imagined that some of these creatures exist, and I could not get enough. And consequently, I kind of lost my passion for drawing because I thought, I can't do any better than this. I can't come up with monsters that are cooler than these things. So,
how do you collect what appears in the frames?
Okay. The only thing we collect out of the wild is insects, and there's a tremendously, well, almost universally agreed upon environmental advantage to insects being sold, being a commodity, because insects are the bottom of the food chain. They're as long as you've got a healthy habitat and a healthy host plant population, insects are going to be there. They're feeding the entire jungle. But the main, I won't say only, but the chief threat to insect populations is always habitat destruction or habitat contamination. And so where we have environments that are pristine or that are virgin or that we want to conserve, people are always going to be surrounding those environments, and people have to find a way to be able to make a living. And so one of the things that I've been able to do over the last 25 years is go into different environments, work with indigenous people, show them that there's a worldwide network of insect collectors, that these things are actually have some value, and that kind of reverses some of the economic pressure to develop that habitat. And it makes it so that a standing forest can actually be economically viable to the surrounding population.
Because insects are renewable.
Absolutely renewable, absolutely sustainable. Yeah.
All right, so that's insects.
That's insects. So
lizards, snakes, fish.
All of the vertebrates in the Exquisite Creatures exhibit, all the vertebrates I've ever worked with, are all reclaimed organisms. And people are always like, what's that supposed to mean? You're reclaiming an organism. Well, they almost all die of natural causes in captivity. So, but I will say almost all, because some, I have some that are roadkill that are in the exhibit. I have some that are fishermen's bycatch. So I work with some trawlers especially out of Borneo and out of the Philippines, and they are, unfortunately, frankly, still trawling, and they'll bring up tons of organisms. They pick out all the viable organisms, and then there's all this stuff left over that is, they don't have any use for. And so sometimes we can find some really interesting things that come out of the ocean that there's no market for. And so everything else is, there's kind of a wide variety of ways to get everything else, but the only thing that is killed for art is our insects, and I have always felt, since I learned about insect ecology, I have always felt that is actually, and most entomologists agree, that is actually ecologically advantageous.
So if an animal expires, say in an aquarium,
Mm-hmm.
do they put it in a freezer on ice? What? How? What?
Yeah, this actually occurs organically in virtually every institution, and frankly, every private breeder and every guy who raises geckos and whatever. They all do the same thing. These are institutions and individuals who have dedicated their lives to the propagation and to the husbandry of a particular organism that, for whatever reason, they are passionate about. Well, when that organism passes, it's not garbage, and they don't know what to do with it. And I had an inside scoop on this because my dad, since he was a little kid, was a bird breeder, was a bird fanatic. He started out as a little kid raising pigeons, and then he went on to Australian finches, and then for whatever reason he kind of settled on mid-sized color mutations of Australian parrots. I have no idea why that was his thing, but he built these gorgeous aviaries everywhere we went. Whether we had times of plenty and times of not plenty, and as I was growing up, and it didn't matter. The first little house we moved in or the first bigger house we moved into, he went out back and started building his aviaries. And so it was ever present, but his birds would eventually die as well, and he wouldn't know what to do with them, and they would end up in our freezer. And I've mentioned this before, but as a kid, it was totally normal that if you want to get to your popsicles, you dig past the dead birds and get your popsicles. So that was kind of, and for the longest time, I thought, well, my dad's the only weirdo out there. As I grew up and learned that this is not normal behavior, I figured that he was the only one who does that. As it turns out, everyone does that. And so what I found is that when I find someone who, or an institution, or a zoo, or any organization that works with these organisms, they universally have a freezer or two or three in the back room that is full of organisms they can't bear to part with, but they don't have any use for.
You have a cooler?
Do I have a cooler?
How do they get back to the studio?
So generally, I'll work with anyone who's willing to work with me, and granted, a lot of them aren't willing to work with me. They just think, it sounds really hokey, obviously. I'm the guy on the phone there. They're going, the guy on the phone who wants the dead stuff's calling again. And so, it's not everyone. But anyone I have a relationship with, they will when something passes, they'll put it in Ziploc baggies and stick it in the freezer. When there's a box full, I overnight it, send them an UPS call tag overnight. I get it, and generally they're in some degree still frozen, and I go to work either immediately preserving them, or they go into my freezers, which are expansive.
I have talked to short story writers and songwriters before, and they'll have an idea, but it's not ready to be a short story or a song yet, so they'll write it down in a notebook and put it away.
Yeah.
And come back to it later.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got, probably 10 big freezers that are bursting at the seams with specimens. By now, it has taken a long time to get to that point. But I will wait. For example, there's a large piece here called Singularity that is probably got, I don't know, maybe 350 turtles and tortoises in it. And it's actually not in the exhibit. It's downstairs somewhere else. and so that is a piece where it took many years of just waiting and waiting. I had an idea for that piece. I actually did a smaller iteration of it years ago, and I wanted to do one that was really grand, and it was kind of meaningful to me, and it has some representation that I think is important. And so it took, I don't know how many years, but 5 or 6 or 7 years of just waiting as turtle trickled in. They'd be set aside, and eventually, when I felt like I had enough, then I went to work preserving all of them at the same time and getting that piece going.
Speaking of waiting, I know you had to wait for a while to get a leafy sea dragon.
Oh, yes.
Which is one of my favorite pieces. It's so beautiful and delicate.
They are amazing.
How do you get a leafy sea dragon?
Wow.
I've never asked that question before. By the way.
I'm not. Okay, yeah, I gotcha. Well, so leafy sea dragons are. There's a really interesting story behind how leafy sea dragons get out of Australia. Australia is in some ways fabulous and in some ways a little bit militant about their conservation. They don't want the export of any Australian flora or fauna, almost for any reason, and there are very few exceptions. The leafy sea dragon is endemic to the southern coast of Australia. They're actually fairly common in their habitat, and so they're not internationally protected. But Australia protects them totally. They have one exception. One guy gets one permit to export one specimen per year for aquariums around the world. Now, leafy sea dragons, the males carry the babies, and so this guy will always look for a gravid or a pregnant male. And all of the aquariums in the world, or at least in Europe and the United States, would just wait in line with bated breath, hoping they're going to be the ones chosen to be able to host that year's selection of leafy sea dragons. Knowing this, and knowing that my only prayer of ever being able to work with a leafy sea dragon was to be able to work with an institution that had received some in the past, I spent many, many years just hounding these institutions and saying, sending them books and saying, look, this is what I do. It'll be beautiful. I promise. I'll do anything. I'll pay. I'll trade. I'll work for you, just to be able to get one of the specimens that had passed in their care that I know are sitting in their back freezers. No one ever agreed, but I did have. But there was one lady that I felt like I had a chance with. I had had one conversation with her. Most of them I couldn't even get the conversation, and I just showed up on her doorstep in Hawaii, and she runs one of the only seahorse breeding facilities in the world. She had displayed leafies a couple of times, and when I showed up, she was kind enough to want me out of her hair, and and gave me a couple of specimens.
Then what is it like working with these specimens? They're so delicate.
Yes.
How do you work with them? Tweezers? I mean.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So thankfully, I was able to acquire the leafy sea dragons recently because I've got 25 years now of experience of just experimenting and trying to figure out cracking codes for all different kinds of organisms. And that was one that, to my knowledge, has never been preserved. Wow. And so I'm just guessing, and I'm taking kind of all of the tricks that I've learned and developed over the years and trying them out. I definitely had to do some reconstruction and rebuilding of some of the leaves in particular. But in the end, I felt like it came out all right.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So yeah,
it's beautiful.
It was really fun.
The colors that exist with these animals, that Gila monster, the orange just pops. Yeah. The coral snakes, that wall of snakes.
Yeah.
And this is the color of the animals.
Absolutely. 100% of the organisms in the exhibit are true to life. And the reason I say true to life and colors unretouched is because there's a small percentage of organisms, the vast majority, I've done nothing to them. This is simply what they look like when they're flying or swimming or crawling in the wild. But with most fish and some reptiles, I just cannot set those colors when they're being preserved. And so I'd have to do some, in some cases it's some preventative maintenance on color, and in many cases it's restoration of the color. And admittedly, I'm really never able to bring back the original vibrancy of that organism from when it's alive. But I get as close as I can.
Most of the work that we see in Crystal Bridges right now is intact. That big roly-poly is all together. Yeah. The king cobra is all together. The birds.
Okay.
What's happening with the birds?
What's happening? Good question. This is a very unsexy story, but it's basically it was a practical limitation that I had. So again, because I started out working with my dad's birds, they're all hookbills. They're all parrots. When you look at a hookbill when it's flying, it looks like its face is on the what we consider a face, is on the ventral side of the body. So it looks like it's looking down. Its nose and its mouth, and is as it's flying. I want to show it extended. I want to show the interplay of those feathers. I want to show all those different colors. And when you do that in a shallow shadow box frame, it looks like it face planted into the back of the mat, and it just looks bad. And,
right.
and a big part of what I'm trying to do is to remove these organisms. I mean, really remove a lot of the organic out of the organism and make them so that we can see them as design elements, so that we can see them as these perfectly designed architectural marvels. And so when you've got a story you can't get over because this poor bird's face is smashed in the back of the frame, it's not going to work. And so basically what I did, finally I kind of got frustrated, and I said, yeah, you know, all I want is the wings and the tail anyway, so let me cut off the wings and the tail and see if that works, and I kind of liked it. So I kept doing it. And now, I mean, I do a lot of different things. We build frames that are a foot deep. We build, you know, all kinds of standing sculptures, basically, and or my team and I. And so I don't have those restrictions now, and so sometimes you'll see birds that are complete.
When I was coming here tonight, I was on the elevator with a woman named Juanita who was eager to see the exhibition, and I asked her if she liked reptiles and insects. She said, oh my gosh, no, I'm scared of them. But that's kind of what you want to do. You want to take people who don't consider themselves outdoor people and give them, you're kind of a liaison between the outdoors and the non-outdoor people.
That's my hope. It really is, and it really came organically as well, because in spite of being a nature buff and a reptile fanatic and charging out into every jungle I could find, I hated insects until I was in my late 20s. I was phobic and had a lot of really scary experiences when I started traveling that to me were like life-shortening. And so when I something had to happen where I was able to make this switch in my view. And one of those experiences that was so formative, I was traveling around Asia with the head knitwear designer for the Donna Karan Couture at the time, when we were sourcing fabrics, and we ended up in Bangkok, and you know, I had never been to Thailand before. That was my first time, and he said, oh, the night markets are interesting, you can go see whatever. And so I was walking the night markets, and as everyone who's been to Thailand probably has seen, there's people selling these, you know, they're horribly preserved, horribly presented, insane insects. And I had never seen anything like that in a less than life-threatening environment. You know, to me, every time I encountered something like that, it was something that had the potential to, you know, as far as I knew, rip my head off. And so I couldn't believe these little monsters. I couldn't believe they existed. I'd never seen anything like it. And it was the first time I was able to go, okay, I'm going to get close. I'm going to get close. And I went back 4 times at this stupid night market to get up, you know, get closer each time. And then something just began to switch. And I went, you know, from a design perspective, at that time I was kind of involved with some of the heads of design, and it was all clean, and it was minimalist, and it was beautiful. It was, you know, kind of 90s before we got a little crazy later on. And I just thought, you know, if I was an industrial designer and I was going to make a little machine that had to be sleek and minimalist and have no waste and be perfect and be beautiful, I couldn't do any better than this. And oh boy, I'm just FYI as a warning to this lady, you know, who's may or may not be here. You know, when we have that emotional investment that's negative, a phobia or something we hate, we've already got a relationship. It's not a good relationship, but if that relationship starts to get healthy, it can turn into a real obsession, and that's been my experience. So consequently, coming back to your original question, what I've tried to do is, with that experience in mind, I want to present everything I can, and many of the specimens you'll see are just simply gorgeous. Everyone would agree. But I want to present everything in that light of design and that light of appreciating. Let's separate ourselves for a moment from the life history of this organism, or from the mannerisms of this organism, or the danger of this organism, and let's just focus on the aesthetics of this organism. And wow, I mean, humanity can't touch it.
And I love how you play with that, because we walk through, first we get color,
Yeah.
vibrant color. Then there's that corner where we don't have color.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, fish.
It's monochromatic. It's a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have giant South American, there Amazonian freshwater rays. There's spitting cobra. There's some other snakes. There's some skeletons. There's all kinds of things. It's a monochromatic area where all of a sudden, whoa! I mean, it's striking that, you know, we've been bathed in color, and all of a sudden, what happens when there's no color? It's really fun.
All right, I want to go back to, you went to the night market 4 times. You got closer to these insects that you had been a little bit concerned about. That's great. You're getting over it.
Yeah.
It's still then a leap to go night collecting, because that's when,
Yeah.
at a night market, they're dead.
Right.
When you're collecting, even the things you don't want to collect, like if you're in the Amazon.
Oh yeah. No. Right. Yeah. So yeah, it was a process. That's absolutely true. Probably the next big leap for me was a time that I was actually working in Taiwan, and there were some jungles in Taiwan, and it was actually a winter coat catalog we were doing. It was just a miserable job. I don't know, it was horrible. And so we had, I wrote about this in one of my books, but they handed out, these little styrofoam containers for lunch. We're sitting there for lunch. I open mine, and it's an octopus on rice, and I'm just like, okay, whatever. Grab my chopsticks, and I go to eat it. I go to grab it, and it bursts open, and all these baby octopus fell out. And I was like, all right. Yeah, I was like, okay, I guess I'm not eating lunch today. So I'm sitting there, I put it away, and I'm just waiting, and just miserable. It was a miserable job. Frankly, I was so happy to get out of fashion. But I'm just waiting, and everyone else is talking, and I don't speak Mandarin, and so I'm just like, okay. And I'm staring at this bush because I have nothing else to stare at. And the bush has been there the entire time. I've been looking at it. I hadn't noticed anything. And as I have nowhere else to look, pre-cell phones, I noticed that there's movement on this bush that had been there the whole time. I hadn't noticed it. And I just start looking closer, and there is an entire colony to this day. I mean, they're probably some kind of a crazy mite. To this day, I don't know what they were. And I was like, what is going on here? And I just was fascinated by what was going on. And then as I'm looking at this, some like damselfly, dragonfly looking thing lands on the same bush. I'm like, holy crap, look at that. That's amazing. And then some spider attacked it. And I'm going, this is like some magical bush where everything happens. I couldn't believe how lucky I was. And amazingly, that attunement to what was happening there, all of a sudden, everywhere I looked, it was happening. And I'd never seen it before. It was changed my whole life.
The outdoors can do that.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so you're right. I mean, there's still a long ways to go before you're really willing to go night collect. Night collecting, just so everybody knows, if you're an entomologist or if you are researching insects, a good percentage of them are diurnal. They fly in the daytime. A good percentage of them are nocturnal. Don't ask me why nocturnal insects are attracted to UV lights. You'd think if they were attracted to UV lights, they'd just come out in the daytime when there's a lot of UV light. But basically, you go out into the jungle. Back in the day, we had to haul out generators and big fat mercury vapor lamps. Now it's a lot easier. But you basically want to put up a big white sheet. You want a moonless night. You want the edge. You want the side of a mountain. You want a little clearing. It helps if you actually start a fire and get some smoke going. Smoke helps. And then you shine crank up your generators, shine your mercury vapor lamp on the big white sheet, and oh my gosh, magic happens. It's incredible. Everything within view of that light comes swooping in. And granted, the first few times, I mean, I'm standing in the shadows just going, oh, you guys got it? Okay, yeah, it looks good. But after a while, you can't help yourself, and you are covered head to toe and you're looking out for wasps, and there's not a whole lot else that in most of the places I go where you have to be too afraid of things that are going to fly in. But there's bad wasps in some of the areas. But basically you're picking them off yourself, you're picking them off the sheet, you're just kind of seeing what you've got. It's just so fun. So fun.
When a whole Amazonian neighborhood comes to that sheet, what does it sound like?
It depends on what season it is. So actually, there's some species that sound like helicopters coming in. So there's a big, in one wall on the exhibit, it's basically the size wall, and it's about scale. And how we have these kind of ideas about ordained proportions of organisms, spiders can be that big to that big. And when they're that big, you're like, what is going on? Roly-polies are that big, and when they're that big, it doesn't make any sense, right? So there is a wall that has a Titanus giganteus, which is probably the loudest insect, and it sounds like they're as adults, their lifespan is extremely short. In fact, it's not even been shown that they ever eat as adults. They pupate as these giant grubs that have never been discovered, never been found, but they're estimated to be about a foot long and, big fat, much fatter than a hot dog, big sausage. And so when they come out at the end of January every year, like in French Guiana is a great place to look for them, they'll start coming in and they sound like a helicopters are landing. It's crazy. A lot of times if it's cicada season, cicadas are idiots. If you guys ever want to go night collecting, just don't go in during cicada season because there's no advantage at all. They just don't even look where they're going. They just hit whatever they want to, and it's like, come on, you guys. So they have no filter. But yeah, so it depends on the season. If it's a season where moths are really plentiful, then it doesn't sound like
quiet.
much.
Okay.
So yeah, it just depends.
I've got a few more questions, but we're ready to open this up. Surely you've got questions as well. Megan told me that there'd be a couple of microphones coming around, and while that gets ready, I want to ask about conservation, because I know that you're committed to conservation, and you hope that our exposure to your work increases
I am.
awareness.
Yes. Thank you for asking that. To me, conservation is critical, and I think there's very few people who don't agree with that. The thing that I am passionate about is practical conservation. There's ways that sometimes, especially us in the first world, have ways of sometimes being a little bit theoretical in our views. We feel like, you know what, if we just cordon off this half of the world and get the people out of it, then everything would be peachy keen. But number one, it's not very practical, and number two, we are a part of nature. And we have a need to affiliate with the natural world. And we have a right to affiliate with the natural world, in my humble opinion. And so there are so many ways, there are so many win-wins of ways that people can benefit and the environment can benefit together, that I get a little frustrated sometimes when it sounds like and it seems like the conflict is being presented as a conflict and is only a win-lose situation. I don't believe in that for the most part. There are certainly exceptions. So yeah, as far as conservation goes, whenever I can be a part of, or whenever we can be a part of creating a situation where humanity benefits, humanity gets the nourishment, spiritual, emotional, physical, that we need, and nature also not only survives but thrives, those are what we, in my opinion, we should be shooting for always.
Let's open this up to questions if anyone had some. There's a gentleman right here in the front row.
Hi. I think I'm going to turn this to the other side so I can make sure it works.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I also love insects. Is there one that you haven't gotten a specimen of yet that you would really love to have from the insect world?
Yeah, yeah. There's a few. I would say probably my first on my list would be a giant weta, which is probably often considered the heaviest insect in the world. It's basically it's a New Zealand insect, and like Australia, New Zealand is militant. Nothing leaves New Zealand, which I totally respect. And so a giant tree weta is like it's a really hard. It's kind of like a wingless cricket. And they're huge, and they're heavy, and they're crazy, and they got big old honking mandibles, and they're a really bizarre creature. And I don't know that I've ever seen one outside of New Zealand. So that would be kind of special. Yeah, good question.
And it's called a
giant tree weta.
Weta.
W-E-T-A.
You say it's the largest. How much?
The heaviest.
The heaviest.
Generally
yes.
considered about the heaviest insect. Yeah. I mean, there's a few competitors. The Goliath beetles are really close, but yeah. Sure.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Christopher, you made a comment on Wednesday that I've thought about all week, and it's about how you said that you can imagine nature and everything that you've done as God's living room.
Yes.
So could you please, I think, share that with everybody?
Sure. So yeah, that's kind of one of the original concepts that I had when I was creating my art. I just kind of got this idea of what would God's living room look like. I bet it would. Well, number one, it's going to be huge, but it would be. I imagined that there would be these framed prototypes, the original specimen in perfect symmetry, exactly as he designed it, and I thought it would go on forever. And that really, that was a dream to me, and I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm getting there. It's so cool. But yeah, it's really fun. But yes, that was kind of one of the original ideas, and I thank you for bringing that up.
Hi, Marion Kahn. We communicated earlier on Instagram.
Oh, great.
I have to say, and I bet you everybody in this room agrees, this was so inspirational. I mean, it's just like, yeah.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
And there is something in your connection with nature where you're able to put it behind glass in a frame, but it reaches out. What do you think is happening? I know you discussed that in some of the wall writing and some of your writings, but I'd like to hear you talk about it.
Oh, thank you. So there is a real thing, biophilia. I mean, I think when we've all heard of it, it's kind of become a little bit of a catchphrase lately. It's the title of my second book. That's probably why it's a catchphrase, by the way. No, just kidding. But there is something that is a real element of the human psyche. We have a natural affinity and a natural desire to be involved in some way, to be connected in some way to nature. And in my experience, that functions differently in every person. Now, I'm not a guy who's going to preach about the evils of screens. I'm on them all the time, so it would be totally hypocritical even if I was. But I will say one of the great casualties of us turning to this two-dimensional world is that all of that information is there and all of that exposure is there and none of the connection is there. We cannot have that connection unless we are face-to-face in real time with those things that we're drawn to. And what I've experienced and what I believe is that everyone, that functions differently in everyone. And it could be a grand design where emissaries are sent all over the world to do certain things. And we are meant to connect in individual and very specific and even intimate ways with the natural world that maybe no one else will understand. And it's amazing to me when I meet people who are spider breeders, and I'm like, who wants to breed spiders? Come on, are we trying to do the opposite of that? But that's what they live for. And something has called to them, something spoke to them, and they can't get enough of the beauty of spiders, which I'm still working on seeing. So I believe that part of the exhibit and one of the calls to action in the exhibit is to pay attention to those things you feel as you walk through the exhibit. And if you are drawn to something, just think about it. Just let that work within you and see if there's maybe a reason why this is the beginning of a love affair that will enrich your life. I think that I've seen it happen too often to believe that it's an anomaly. I think that it's fairly ubiquitous. Great question.
Got him? Yes, on this side? Right here?
Got the microphone. So some of the bigger animals are posed. They're, their tails curved just
Right.
so.
Uh-huh.
How do you get them to be flexible so you can shape them?
So were we talking about like vertebrates? Are you talking about like lizards? Are you talking about what kinds of animals?
Yeah.
Okay.
The octopuses, the
Okay.
lizards, yeah.
So there's two main kinds of preservation that I do, and one is organisms that have an exoskeleton, which are infinitely easier than organisms that don't have an exoskeleton, both vertebrate and non-vertebrate. So what I'll have to do with any organism that does not have an exoskeleton, number one, I've got a quick time frame. Unfortunately, when things come to me, they're always in varying stages of decay, with one exception. Most of my octopus come from the local Chinese food market, and so it's pretty easy. They're I just have to piece them back together, but they're made to be eaten, so they're fresh. But they're about the only fresh thing I ever get to work with. Everything else, for whatever reason, has perished and people haven't known what to do with it, or maybe they didn't find it right away, or whatever. And there's varying degrees of decay from hardly noticeable to horrific and rancid, and all of my staff leave and they say, "Call us when you're done." So there's varying stages of decay. I've kind of developed some ways of injecting them and plumping them up in these specimens that I'm just trying to save, that they're on their last leg and there's not much left but skin, and just try to get them, as long as I can get them frozen in the position I want, that's when I can start the freeze drying process, which will be anywhere from a couple of months is about the shortest amount of time, up to a year in freeze drying. And I can talk about what that process is at some other time. It's kind of boring, but it's a fascinating science, and it's something that over a couple of decades I've finally kind of gotten to the point where I feel like usually I can kind of anticipate how this type of organism, even if it's something I haven't worked on before, is going to respond and what type of treatment it's going to need. But I do all the shaping and the forming beforehand, before they're dried. Once they're dried, once they come out, if we open any of those frames and pull the specimens out, it's like balsa wood. It's like, I mean, they're hard and brittle, and they'd snap in half if you tried to bend them.
I imagine you've pioneered some techniques.
Pardon?
You've pioneered some techniques through trial and error?
Actually, I have.
Yeah, I figured.
And so, it's mainly just tricks. But I know that they're kind of unique, because I've mentioned this before, but I've had a couple of different Ivy League schools call and say, hey, you got to tell us how you're doing. This is impossible. And so it's really been fun to go, well, I went to Lowe's and I went to Home Depot and I bought every chemical they had, and I tried this bath and I tried that bath, and you guys can figure it out yourselves. You got a $90 billion endowment you're picking on me for. So anyway.
We've got some time if there. Oh boy, Olivia, we've got. Oh, okay.
Microphone. All right, I push this little button. Oh no, here I am. I loved it. I love bugs. I was surprised to walk around the corner and be out of bugs. I was waiting to see all the dragonflies of the world, etc. So I was wondering, I look at bugs all the time. I find Doug bugs all the time, and they're usually being eaten or in moldy.
Yeah.
How
right.
do you keep that from happening? Do you
part of the
suck all the energy out of those frames?
No. But part of the that's a great question, and part of the secret, and that I discovered this early on, was that the frames have to be hermetically sealed. If they're airtight, then nothing can get in and eat them. And we always think of things just kind of disintegrating on their own. Generally, they're not disintegrating on their own. They're getting eaten. They're getting eaten by tiny book lice or carpet beetles or little things that they're all over the place. We don't notice them, but their job is to find and break down organic matter. And so as long as I can protect them from those insect pests, I mean, there are insect specimens that are hundreds of years old in museums because they've been protected. And so really these organisms, the only danger to my pieces is some degree of photodegradation, and that's something I'm always struggling against.
All right. Some questions on this side, Lydia.
At what point were you surprised at the uniformity and the symmetry? Because when I look at the pieces, they, maybe to my untrained eye, they look completely uniform. So are all beetles of a certain species or whatever exactly the same marking?
No. So a great question. So she's asking me about uniformity and about how do species always look the exact same? If I'm going to try to do a succession of color, I mean, how does that work? It's actually really interesting. Within certain species, there can be radical variations of color, usually due to either locality or to temperature and humidity during pupation. That can change the color dramatically. And so sometimes certain pieces if you're collecting in the Philippines or in Indonesia, for example, there's I think 17,000 islands in Indonesia, and many, if not most of those islands have, if not endemic species, endemic color forms. And so as you island hop, you're finding new colors of the same species over and over again. It's the funnest thing in the world. It's so exciting to be able to find a new color form. And so, no, there's a lot of selecting that's going into the process, and that's part of the waiting game of saying, boy, I'd love to be able to make this wash of color, but I don't have enough of this species. Someday, maybe I'll find that color, and sometimes it takes a long time.
Do you rearrange as you're creating something that might be looking for color?
Well, it depends on how fixed I am with the idea of what I'm trying to create and whether or not I believe I've already got the materials. But yeah, I'm always playing. I mean, I'll just prep a bunch of insects and throw them out and start playing with them and seeing what really works with the negative space, with the use of space, with the colors and the textures, and trying to create a type of story that I feel like is worthy of those organisms.
Got time for maybe two more questions? I'm going to I'll let Olivia decide who gets to ask one of the last ones.
Hi. So what criticisms have you encountered throughout your career or throughout this exhibit?
Excellent question. I've had probably some relatively mild criticism on my writing. I'm not I think I'm an okay writer, but I'm not trained as a writer. So one of the reviews for one of my books, I think by Geographic in Europe, they didn't think I was terribly proper. And so, I've had some criticism on writing. It is, some people don't believe me when I say the origins of my organisms. I don't know why they wouldn't, but I guess there's people who lie about things. Some people have concerns about environmental impact, which I totally understand, and I hope that I've covered that. I try to. And then, I get the occasional, actually, one of the, an opening, I think it was in Minnesota, I had some snotty youth walking around, and I, just talking to people, and I said, what do you think? And are you having a good experience? And they're like, no, this fills me with hate and disgust. And I was like, all right. And I just said, well, so why are you here then? I wouldn't stay somewhere where I felt hate and disgust. Anyway, so yeah, I think like most artists, you're going to have detractors, and when you're doing anything new, anything unique, anything different, people are going to wonder about where it came from.
Got a couple more questions on this side.
Hello, I'm
Hi.
also Christopher.
All right, good
nice
name.
to meet you. And I am interested in your background in the fashion world.
Okay.
And the intersection of that with conservation and what you're doing now. And do you see that there might be a role for what you're doing now back in the fashion world? Fashion is huge to culture.
Yeah.
And today I had to wear my salamander T-shirt.
Very cool.
I
love
thought
it.
it fit with the exhibit.
Yeah.
So could you speak a little more about conservation and fashion? Obviously, in our history, you know, the collection of bird feathers for hats, the
Sure.
use of furs has been very negative
Yeah. towards
conservation.
Yeah.
But what do you see the possibility being for that intersection?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I think that we've come a long ways as a society with regards to sustainability. I think that it's something that's on top of mind for really any designer that I know of, and so I'm grateful for that. I don't have personally much of a connection between my fashion experience and conservation because I was a model. I mean, it's a hokey dippy job, but it paid the bills and it took me around the world, so it was cool. I knew it was not what I was going to do my entire life, and I was always looking for a way out. But while it paid the bills, it was great, and it ended up obviously exposing me to my life's work. I do believe that there is tremendous potential for this work in the fashion world as well, and I've been approached by a number of designers, and I've been knocked off by a number of designers. We've had some interesting conversations with some of the biggest names in design that have gone ahead and just lifted images and done what they wanted with them. And so we've had some conversations, and that has stopped short of legal action, but probably should have proceeded. And so yeah, sometimes that happens, but I do believe that that's simply biophilia. That's simply because designers are looking at these stunning organisms and saying, oh my gosh, I can't do any better than that, which I couldn't agree more with. Just don't use my images for it, so. Unless we talk first. So.
And one more question right here, right back there. Yes.
I love the color of insects, and my question is, what is the biggest insect you have collected?
Ooh, that's a great question. If you're talking about big, there's a lot of ways to define big. So longest would definitely be a walking stick. In fact, this is kind of a funny story. And this is, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm totally self-taught in everything. In all of the science side of what I do, and the naturalistic side of what I do, and for the most part, the art side of what I do. And so when I was creating my first book, I wanted to have a section that was all life-sized organisms. So that book is pheromone, and it's kind of a design primer. It was meant to be about design. It just happens to use insects as the medium. And the one insect that we had just collected out of Borneo was this massive walking stick. It was the biggest one I've ever seen. And I printed it life size in my book. It took up it went off of 2 pages. It's a big book, and opening it was bigger than both the pages, and so it went off the pages. I thought that was kind of cool. And then about a year later, some entomologists realized that it was a new species. And not only was it a new species that he named, but it was the largest species of insect ever at that time.
Wow.
So I was kind of like, oh boy, missed the opportunity there. but it was fine. I mean, and he got eclipsed. He got his just desserts. He got eclipsed by a couple of new discoveries 2 or 3 more times since then. So his fame didn't last long. But that's probably the longest by far is a giant walking stick, and the biggest ones come out of Southeast Asia. I think the largest right now just came out of China. It's astounding how many of the biggest insects in the world are being discovered recently in China. You think, I mean, how has nobody seen this in China, for crying out loud? There's a lot of people there. And so actually very recently, last 2 years, the largest aquatic insect in the world, the widest wingspan of any aquatic insect in the world, which I have in the exhibit, was discovered in China just a couple of years ago. Great question. Pardon? It's a Dobson fly. It's a giant Dobson fly. It's a new species that is really spectacular. And the specimen I have, I mean, there's only a few of them in the world. The specimen I have probably isn't the biggest, but it's still a very good size.
I want to ask you a couple of final questions about the exhibit itself, because when you walk through, you'll hear music.
Yeah.
Who composed that music?
Oh, well, I am fortunate to be a member of a very talented family. So I've got all of my boys are performers, they're musicians, they're artists, they're designers, they're amazing. And so so my oldest, who's just finishing up his university at university, he mixed that whole thing and came up with the whole thing. My wife did the interior film you'll see that's displayed on a wall. She designed that, and it's just really fun. So we've kind of a little bit of a family venture. We're trying to involve everybody a little bit.
When you exhibit in natural history or science museums, you mentioned that they often say, here's the space, go.
Yeah.
At Crystal Bridges, you got to collaborate.
Oh, yeah.
And what's that like?
It was wonderful. You know, it was really fun, and it was brand new for me because I've really never had an experience. I mean, this is, I don't know how many museums we've done. This is probably the 10th or 12th, good museum that the exhibit has been in. And in every one of them, I've done everything from start to finish. And then all of a sudden, I have these world-class artists and world-class designers to kind of bounce ideas off of. And poor Shusha and I, we butted heads a couple times because I'm like, I have no experience dealing with, collaborating. I just kind of always ever done everything on my own. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful experience to be able to come into an institution like this that is already such a gift, not only to Bentonville, it's a gift to the world. Yeah. And to be able to work with people that are so talented, and to be able to bounce ideas off each other and see what they come up with and go, oh wow, I never would have thought of that. It's wonderful. So it's been really fun.
Finally, your subject matter, reclaimed, once alive, now not, working with this material, with these animals, do you think about your mortality any differently than you might have?
Well, I've done it for so long, I don't know if it's different than I might have.
Yeah.
But I do. I mean, I just turned 55, and I do, yeah, you think about your mortality. But death is an inescapable, essential part of life. And frankly, it's one of the things that makes life so precious. And, everything I do, like I've mentioned, I'm trying to kind of focus on the design elements of these organisms. I'm trying to really make everything as antiseptic and as minimalist and as beautiful and as geometric as I can. But I have one piece towards the beginning of the exhibit that I really had a completely different, completely opposite intention. And that was a piece that you'll see towards the beginning on the left-hand side. It's just a bunch of unapologetically dead finches and tanagers. And they're beautiful, but I think that the name of that piece is Lest We Forget. And so, to me, I don't want to get emotional here. Sorry. But it is a sacred privilege to to work with organisms, with beings. These are little beings, and they've had their lives and they've done their thing, and to me it's a sacred material. I would imagine if I was a painter or if I was a sculptor, you know, marble's not that sacred. It's a material.
Yes.
It's got its thing, you know, it's got its value, but you know, it doesn't have the life force and the spirit that these organisms had. And so I really hope that one of the things that people feel as they go through the exhibit, one of the main emotions I hope that people feel is reverence. That we share this beautiful world with a plethora of biodiversity that is so beautiful that to me it indicates that we are loved, that there's somebody out there, something, some force in the universe, and everyone probably has their own ideas about what that is. Of course I do too. But there is something that is telling us that we are loved. And so to me, love is the driving force behind the work.
Thank you so much for your work. Thank you for spending time, Christopher. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to purchase a book, they are available in the back, and Christopher Marley will be signing books up front if you would like to queue up for your